So we're looking at our first PowerPoint today for PFT 106. So this is going to be special populations and exercise prescriptions. So what's kind of fun about this is we're going to actually talk a little bit about one of NASM's competitors, which is kind of fun. We're actually going to talk a little bit about ACSM today, the American Collegiate, or maybe just College of Sports Medicine. NASM's probably, I would say, like, if there was one other certification that I would recommend someone get, it would be an ACSM cert. They're the only other company that I think like really goes toe to toe with NASM in terms of like quality content and like instruction. I like NASM better. Obviously, I'm biased. I've been with NASM my entire career. But ACSM has done a really good job of focusing a lot in the medical field side of personal training. So they really have looked a lot at like specific like, medical conditions and how exercise is basically a treatment for those diseases. Now, it should be noted very clearly that we are not applying like treatment. We are not treating diseases, okay? Like that is not something we do. However, exercise has been shown to basically improve the symptoms and like risks of basically every disease out there. We know that like cancer patients who exercise regularly tend to struggle with their breathing less, and they tend to have more energy. We know that diabetics who exercise improve their glucose control. We know that clients with hypertension can lower that blood pressure thanks to like general exercise. And we're just talking about general activity. We're not even talking about like, doing 3 sets of 12 push-ups, like we're not talking about specific exercises. We're talking about general activity. So a lot of what we're going to look at has actually been researched by ACSM, which is kind of fun. So you guys are kind of getting like a little bit of a different approach to stuff today. One of the other things that we're going to be looking at today as we go through it, we are also going to be looking at some of the important other types of techniques that you can use when it comes to working with a client. So we generally spend a lot of our time talking about how to write like an OPT template, right? Like an OPT workout, right? Like we'll pull up an OPT and we're like, we start with the warm-up section and, get that all written down, and we move into our movement prep, right? This is like an actual like workout, right? But this isn't necessarily like an overall fitness plan. That's a workout, right? Like that's exactly what you do during that individual session. But what about like writing out a plan for your client, right? What about like coming up with a specific like, action plan to do with your client? Well, that's where there's a lot of different techniques out there. You can kind of make up your own if you want to. That's actually kind of what I do. I tend to just kind of write things down in sort of a general templating. It looks something kind of like this. That's not what I want. Something kind of like this. So you can see like I will oftentimes like write like out like a priority goals of my clients. And then I will, obviously send them their workout template. Like here's, their actual workout template that I, would send them. I'd write them like a little bit of a nutrition plan, like a little bit about like what our expected, body weight is going to look like over a couple weeks. And then I would also schedule out like specifically what their, annual plan is. So like, for the first 3 months here, and then like how those months are going to kind of shake down in terms of like strength training versus cardio. So this person, we've got on a really, really, really basic routine where they're basically going to have a 1 day split in the first month, a 2 day split in the second month, a 3 day split in the next. So that's what I like to do. It's a little bit different, than what is out there, but I find that makes it very easy for me to keep my clients on track because they know every step of the way. Kind of like how I like to go over what the 8 days are going to look like at the top of a class. But a different technique that we're going to look at are what are called SOAP notes. And SOAP notes are actually something that's very common pretty much in medical fields just in general, like dentists use soap notes, psychiatrists use soap notes, doctors use soap notes. But we can actually sort of absorb that a little bit and use it in our industry as well. And so basically soap notes are this notation tool that allows you to kind of write out a plan for your client on one page, and starts with, what subjective information you need to gather, what objective information you need to gather. So like what things are priorities and important to you before going into like a fitness assessment. Then the assessments that you actually performed and what their results were. And then your plan of action. You have like a little action plan that you kind of fill out at the bottom. So we're gonna be looking at that in this course, and we'll build different soap notes for different types of clients. That's what's kind of fun about this class is, once we get into the individual like special populations, we'll be building some soap note examples for our clients, and we'll take a look at like what those look like. So that's a really kind of fun approach to this stuff. So I'm stoked to get into it, because this is a little bit of a unique class with some interesting takes on program design. So for those of you who have wanted to a little bit less of the general OPT stuff and a little bit more of just like how to kind of write out a workout, maybe just on line paper, this is your class. So looking at the top here, it's estimated that about 90 million Americans are living with some type of like chronic health condition. So we definitely know that like a lot of individuals, a lot of people are dealing with some type of like disease, right? That figure probably going to go up, considering that like sedentary levels are also going up. I'm curious to know what people's health status and chronic disease status is going to be after a year of lockdown. Like I'm curious how many people like might have developed things like osteoporosis from not getting enough exposure to the sun, or things like that. But we definitely see that figure is going to rise for a couple different reasons. One, like I said, as a society, we're getting a little bit more sedentary, which is not awesome. But the other thing that we're seeing is like people live longer. We do have like advances in modern medicine. So we are able to keep a body alive longer, even if it does have like a specific condition. So if that's the case, if we're, using advances in modern technology to enhance the length of someone's life, well, we should use advances in exercise technology and exercise knowledge really to enhance that quality of life. And that's kind of what we're looking at. So again, we're not necessarily treating any diseases. We are working with our client through general exercise, and that's going to result in general improvements in that disease, right? Like I've had plenty of clients like that I've worked with, many clients who are diabetics, and then they've started working and exercising and getting their diet under control. And guess what? They don't need insulin anymore, so they have normal glucose levels. They're not suffering from diabetes. Did we cure diabetes? No, there is no cure for diabetes. But we did, we generally improved everything else, and that resulted in that thing going away, So that is sort of an intro there. The big one that we're going to talk about, you'll notice like we're going to spend, it's just going to come back to this over and over and over again, is cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular disease, which accounts for more than half of the deaths in the US, by the way. That is the leading cause of death in the United States, which is, by the way, a completely preventable disease that really no one needs to solve. Like, don't get me wrong, like you could be born with a cardiovascular defect, sure. Or, something could happen in your life that's like catastrophic and keeps you from moving, and then your body, or you weren't able to like access to certain nutrition stuff. But like generally cardiovascular disease should be considered perfectly preventable. I mean, this is something that like doesn't naturally occur. Arthritis, that's like your cartilage just gets worn down. It's been around your whole life, like as you get older, you're wearing that stuff down. It makes sense that like a lot of people suffer from arthritis, right? Cardiovascular disease, not so much. This is something we really should try to avoid. All it takes is regular physical activity and keeping that ticker healthy. So that is something that we're going to see here. We definitely know that leads to premature, mortality. So the CDC is going to support and kind of like we've already talked a little bit about that physical inactivity is one of the really major underlying causes here. Like I said, I'm kind of curious. I wonder if that statistic is out by now. Like, let's see here, quarantine and heart disease. Have we seen any? Is there any like links to this? There we go. The effects of quarantine on general populations. Okay, that's a huge cookies notice. I really wish they hadn't passed that bill. I'm so freaking tired of having to click the little cookie thing that pops up now on the internet. Yeah, maybe. They haven't really. They're talking about it in general. Kind of interesting though. I'm curious to see if like cardiovascular disease is worse this year or not. Just because people have been like underactive, or, and this is what I hope happened, I wonder if so many people are just like working from home and they have like a little bit more free time on their hand, and like, they started craving physical activity and going for walks regularly. I mean, I will say, I don't know if you guys noticed this, but like I see people walking more often now than I used to. Just, people out on the streets going for a walk. I know that I took up walking a little bit here and there just to like clear my head on days when I knew that I shouldn't go for another run. But yeah, we definitely know that like physical activity is the really big sort of key causer here. So clearly, an active and fit way of living is not only like important for us to, it's cost effective for reducing your risk for heart disease, but it's safe and effective when it comes to reducing that morbidity and mortality. And that's one of the things that I say too. Like sometimes like I'll talk to people, not even people that I'm trying to necessarily like get as a client, but I'll be at like a party or something. And I'll be talking to someone and, they're like, what are you doing? It's like, I was a personal trainer. And they're like, okay, cool. And they're like, yeah, I wanted to hire a personal trainer, but it's just so expensive, right? And I wanted to get a gym membership, but it's just so expensive. Like, I just can't afford it right now. And it's interesting to me because, like, whenever I hear that argument, the first thing that my brain does, especially with like the I can't afford like a gym membership thing, the first thing is like, I'm like, I don't see how you can afford not to have a gym membership. like in my opinion, it's totally the opposite. I mean, don't get me wrong, you don't need a gym membership. You could easily go to the park. There are free workout places all over the place. You can do body weight exercises in your own house. There are lots of things that you can do. But when I hear someone say like they don't have time or they don't have the money to exercise, my brain thinks exactly the opposite. I'm like, I think that like you don't have the time to not exercise, or you don't have the time to not, or the money not to exercise, because like a heart attack is going to take a lot of your time away from you, and it is going to be extremely expensive. Like, my parents are still right now paying for the medical bills that my mom, good Lord, my mom's heart attack from 2 years ago. And they are still tens and tens of thousands of dollars in debt from that because it was extremely expensive. The ambulance ride alone was a couple $1,000s. And Tom's, we don't have that kind of money. So like we definitely that's what I think of whenever I hear someone say like I don't have time. It's like you need to make time. This is something that's non-negotiable. This is like one of the most important things in our life. So secondary and preventative medicine, right? The idea of like preventative medicine, the idea that being generally active results in a just generally healthier person, which reduces your risk in general of disease. Like I didn't say cardiovascular disease, I didn't say diabetes, I said activity reduces your risk of disease. Guess what? There's a friggin' disease running around the world right now. And one of the things that they have shown that it puts you at an increased risk for it is lack of physical activity. I literally just saw the CDC post up yesterday coronavirus and physical inactivity. Literally yesterday. News. 1 day ago, they just posted up. They know that inactivity is associated with higher COVID-19 risks. You are more likely to catch it, which is funny because you think about like, gym is a pretty dirty environment, like full of germs, but you're exposing yourself to those germs and you're exercising, so your body is like on defense mode, which is what keeps your body strong and able to actually fend off these foreign invaders. So that's definitely something that we see in general. The biggest ones we're going to see, though, the most common diseases that are associated with a reduction, like exercise is going to have the most positive, it's sort of the most bang for your buck, are going to be hypertension, diabetes, and hyperlipidemia, or high cholesterol, if you want to call it that. These are definitely going to be our three. These are the big three, right? So hypertension, we're going to go ahead and define that because we want to have like a specific sort of black and white definition just so we can classify, if we're going to classify people, right? So hypertension is going to be defined as, it's generally like high blood pressure, right? But particularly, it is defined as a blood pressure that exceeds 140/90. So normal blood pressure should be around 120/80. And that's millimeters of mercury, by the way. Like you'll often see it listed like this, mmHg/90 mmHg. So capital H, lowercase g. So that's what this actually looks like. And what I mean by that when I say like millimeters of mercury is basically when you're using a blood pressure cuff, they used to use mercury in those cuffs, similar to like thermometers, in order to like, measure how much pressure was being exerted. And so it would be this much pressure is how many millimeters of mercury it'd be, right? So normal blood pressure is 120/80. And that's what we're looking for. So what your blood pressure is, right, is it's the amount of pressure pushing on the walls of your blood vessels away from the inside. So is there, 140 millimeters of mercury or 120? Is there during like the contraction of your heart? That's going to be the top number. So the top number is during a heart's contraction. We call that systole, or your systolic pressure. And then the bottom number is when your heart relaxes, there's going to be, obviously there's still some pressure because there's still blood in the blood vessels, right? But the pressure is less because your heart is relaxed currently. So because of that, the pressure is going to be a little bit lower. How much pressure is pushing during the relaxation of the heart? We call that diastole, and that's the lower number. So it'll always be, the top number will be much higher than the bottom number. Although, not all that. It'll always be higher, but sometimes, sometimes there's not a huge difference between the two. So if that pressure gets up to 140 or if it gets up to 90 during the relaxation, if systolic or diastolic get to either 140/90, that is what we consider high blood pressure. If you're at 139/89, you're technically still considered normal blood pressure. You'll sometimes hear people say like that's pre-hypertension. Pre-hypertension is usually classified as anything from like 130/85. But if you ask a lot of doctors, they're like, I don't know, there's no such thing as like pre-hypertension. We don't really see that many problems with high blood pressure until it starts to chronically be about 140/90. So 135/80 or 130/85 is certainly not awesome. And it's a sign that you are, clogging up your, arteries, or you're weakening your heart, or, you're creating like a problem. But is it actually like affecting your health yet? Maybe not. Maybe not until you get to those higher levels. So that is hypertension. We know that about 29% of all Americans, about one in, that's about 1 in 3 people have high blood pressure, with 65% of people over 65 years old, most seniors for sure. The next one we're going to see is diabetes. So diabetes, or impaired glucose control, right? So this is the 6th leading cause of death in the US. So we definitely know that this is another massive epidemic. And here's the thing, diabetes also, for the most part, entirely preventable. We do know that there are 2 types of diabetes. So both of them are going to be defined as impaired glucose control, right? Type 1 diabetes, though, is where your body's not producing enough of the hormone insulin. So what insulin does, right? Like insulin's job, it's created by your pancreas, and its job is to signal to your cells to intake glucose. So, imagine your blood, right? And you got these red blood cells, and then you've got these like random little like carbohydrate sugar molecules running around in your blood. That's what happens, right? Like this has milk in it, right? And so there are milk sugars in this coffee. So when I drink this, it's going to go into my digestive system. My digestive system is going to take those milk sugars and it's going to break them down into individual sugars. Now I'm left with, just a couple molecules of glucose. That glucose passes into my bloodstream, and now my blood sugar level goes up ever so slightly. Insulin is its job. So then when my when my blood sugar levels go up, my pancreas is going to go, all right, let's make some insulin. So it makes some insulin. And then what that's going to trigger is my cells are going to uptake that. Now, I had a pretty hard workout yesterday. So guess what? I burned through a lot of sugar while I was doing that workout. Mostly the stored sugar that I had, right? Like some of the passive sugar that was in my blood, but mostly like my glycogen, right? The stored sugar that I keep in my muscles and my liver. So my body's going to go, oh, great. Like we got glucose in here. We need to fill that back up from yesterday. Cause we got a pretty hard workout to do today. Right. So like what it's going to do is it's going to pull that, sugar out of my blood and start linking it together. And now I've got a bunch of glucose stored as what we call glycogen inside my muscles and inside my liver and, stored throughout my body. So that's awesome, right? That's what insulin does. It triggers the uptake of glucose by my body's cells. But what happens if there's just no room to put any of that sugar? What if my glycogen stores are already full? Well, that's where insulin comes in as well. Insulin's job is going to go, okay, well, I don't have anywhere to put this. Right? I don't have anywhere to put all of this sugar. So instead, what we are going to do, we are going to convert it into triglycerides, and then we will store it in fat cells. And so it'll actually take that carbohydrate and it'll rearrange it and turn it into a triglyceride, which is basically like a little glycerol molecule and then 3 little fatty acids attached to it. And so then it'll store that inside of a fat cell. And so that's what happens to that molecule of glucose, along with a bunch of other ones, right? And now, guess what? Essentially, insulin did I did the same thing with that sugar that I would have done, right? I stored it for later use. But I could have stored it as the temporary high intensity version if I had emptied my glycogen stores. But in this version, I stored it as like the long-term storage. Now I increased the size of one of my fat cells. I shoved more triglycerides into it, right? And eventually what happens is that stuff gets, those adipocytes, the fat cells, they get so large they can't really fit any more triglycerides in them. So then that cell divides, and now you got 2 fat cells, and they can both be filled up. And there you go. And then that process kind of repeats itself. So, that's sort of how we experience obesity. And that happens just in general caloric surpluses, right? If you have too much protein, guess what? It gets converted into carbohydrates. And guess what? If you have too many carbohydrates, it gets converted into fat. If you have too much fat and you're not burning enough energy, guess what? It can also be stored as fat. Shocker of the year. So it's not about like carbohydrates making you fat. It's not about like protein or fats making you fat, right? It's just an excess of calories. They all get converted into something, some storage form that we're going to use later. This is why people lose so much weight really early on. like in the first week, if somebody goes on like a crash diet, right? If you just start dieting, your first week, you will see a pretty substantial drop when you go on your first caloric deficit. And the reason why is because your body is tapping into glycogen. So you're storing less glycogen in your body. And glycogen is mostly holds onto a lot of water as well inside of it. It's this sort of like wet, soupy carbohydrate. So boom, lots of weight lost, a lot of water weight. And that's why people will, often get discouraged. They'll see a big drop in the beginning, and then that gives them unrealistic expectations. And they're like, oh, I should be losing like 6 pounds every week. And it's like, no, 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 no. Definitely not. So back to diabetes a little bit. I kind of got sidetracked, but back to diabetes. We know that glucose's job is to act as like an energy source. And we know insulin's job is to store that energy source for later. But if it can't do that, well, then it'll convert it and store it as fat later. But here's the thing, if it does that all day, right? Like let's say you're just creating so much of this insulin, right? Your sugar levels just go up and down all freaking day, right? Big high sugar meal, right? And then you don't eat for a couple hours and then you're like, oh, I'm starving. So then you have a big high sugar meal again, right? And you're just bringing in like, way too easy to break down carbohydrates. Well, what's going to end up happening is your body's going to make massive amounts of insulin in response. And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but like this cup of coffee does not exactly do for me what it used to when I first started drinking coffee. Like when I first started drinking coffee, I remember being like, man, this stuff is amazing. Like I have so much energy. I feel so great. And now it's like, oh, I need that cup of coffee. And guess what? It didn't really do that much for me, because I built up a tolerance to caffeine, right? Your body builds up a tolerance to most types of chemicals. So when you produce massive amounts of insulin, all the time, your body's cells start to become immune to it. And then your blood sugar levels stay elevated. So your body makes even more insulin in response. And eventually that kind of gets the job done, eventually you're hitting it so hard that it's like, all right, I will finally uptake that glucose, right? But what ends up happening is now there's all this massive amounts of insulin just running through your body, right? Because it took forever to start getting it uptaken. And then suddenly that insulin finally starts having an effect on your body's cells. And so then it pulls all of the sugar out of your blood. And you start losing massive amounts of blood sugar. And now suddenly your blood sugar is really, really low. What does that trigger? It triggers hunger. And that hunger often leads to overeating. And that overeating leads to, spiked blood sugar levels. So it's where your sugar levels are getting more and more and more out of whack. And here's why that's bad. Because here's the thing. It's like, well, what's so bad about having I'm supposed to have sugar in my blood. What's so bad about that, right? Well, when you leave sugar in your blood, it actually, your blood's job is to deliver oxygen to your cells. But if it is full of sugar, that sugar can prevent oxygen from binding to your cells. And so that can actually lead to suffocation. And your cells start to suffocate, and that can lead to cell death and necrosis of tissues, and definitely stuff that we don't want to see. So that's type 2 diabetes. That is where your cells have become resistant to its own insulin. And that is the most common type of diabetes. There could also be type 1 diabetes. Absolutely. We used to see, most cases of diabetes used to be type 1 diabetes. Like when, we first started really kind of understanding the fact it's like there's this disease that like is harming people and we don't really know why. They get really like low energy and then they pass out, right? And it's like what's going on with like these individuals? And it was type 1 diabetes. It was where their pancreas was not producing enough of this hormone. They basically have a bum pancreas. So luckily there was the invention of insulin. Which, by the way, who invented insulin? We should give props to this person. Who invented insulin? Frederick Banting who was the scientist who discovered insulin, and he created the synthetic version of it, which is pretty freaking amazing, because he then did not patent it. He gave it away basically for free because it would have like a really good, super positive impact on the world. Very similar to the scientist who invented penicillin. Both those scientists did not patent. And yet, insulin in the US is more expensive than it's ever been. That's a longer conversation that doesn't belong in this class, but if anybody ever wants to have it, I will. I would love to, because it's super upsetting. Anyway, that's type 2. So type 2 diabetes is where you need to take insulin because insulin doesn't have the same effect that it used to. So you need a bigger dose. Type 1 diabetes is where your pancreas doesn't create enough insulin. So you need to take it synthetically because you need to have it. So we definitely know that low fitness levels, especially in men, although it's common in both genders, men with low fitness levels, women with people with low fitness levels are likely to suffer from diabetes. But what we see right here is that men with low fitness levels who have diabetes are actually 4 times more likely to die prematurely as men who are active with diabetes. So they're looking at like people who are actually active who have diabetes versus people who are inactive. Even if you have diabetes, if you just continue walking, it will, make you much more active, and that activity will reduce your risk by about 4 times as much. Again, why the heck do we love, this is the big reason why we love physical activity. One other one that we're going to see is hyperlipidemia. I'm not sure why this is not coming up next here. Interesting. The next one, the big third disease that we're going to see is hyperlipidemia, elevated cholesterol levels. Now, this is often what leads to hypertension. Cholesterol is a fat protein, right? When we look at like what HDL cholesterol is, it's your high density lipoproteins. That's what the L stands for. It stands for lipoprotein, right? So a lipoprotein is a little bit fat, a little bit lipo, and a little bit protein, right? So there's 2 different versions, right? HDL versus LDL. And they are just slightly different looking than each other when you look at them like chemically. There we go. So we can actually see, if you look at like this right here, this is your high density cholesterol here, and this is your low density cholesterol here. So what we're looking at is the low density stuff, right? The low density, we call that your bad cholesterol, right? It's just not very dense. It tends to be much larger in size too, actually. Oh, there we go. This is just a great picture right here. So we can actually, was that an Asim? Sorry. We can actually see this LDL has more fat stored within it. It's low density in terms of proteins, right? And so it's a little bit larger in size. So what that means, I like to think of LDL, I'll describe this to my clients. I'll say it's like lazy density lipoproteins. It moves through your blood, but it's not pushed very well by your blood because it's not very dense. So it ends up parking itself on your blood vessels. And what that leads to is a blockage in your blood vessels, right? So we start to see, a fatty streak start to form. Like this, right? And then eventually that fatty streak gets so large that it starts pinching red blood cells. And then those red blood cells start getting stuck on this weird texture. This is supposed to be a very smooth inner tube. But it starts actually getting like, textured on there. And then, this fat grabs that fat, and that fat grabs that fat. And so these little cholesterol start building up until it causes this fatty streak. And then one blood cell starts clotting to another blood cell, or starts clotting to another one. And then that can fully block your arteries. And that blockage is going to prevent oxygen from being delivered to your body's tissues. And when that happens, your cells start to suffer. I'm sorry, not suffer, suffocate. Your cells can't get any oxygen, and then that causes them to die. So if this happens in the heart, which is the pump that sends blood throughout your entire body, you're in big trouble. Like that's a heart attack. So high cholesterol is basically where we see an excess of low density lipoproteins, the bad cholesterol, the lazy density lipoproteins, and a smaller amount of high density lipoproteins, because high density is good. This is full of proteins. It's solid. And so when it's moving through your blood, it knocks that lazy stuff off the walls. Not actually. What it actually does is it actually uses proteins to suck some of the fat away. And so it actually destroys your LDL. But I like to imagine it's in there scrubbing away, and that HDL is so good for you. That's one of the reasons why, it's so important to have like healthy omega-3s and omega-6s in your diet. It's one of the reasons why it's so important to have a high fiber diet. Fiber is the weird one. Like sometimes people are like, why does fiber affect my cholesterol at all? You're like, you wouldn't think that fiber, which is a carbohydrate, would have anything to do with fats. But remember, fiber is the stuff that your digestive system can't break down. It's too complicated. So it gets all the way to your large intestine before it ever starts getting broken down, and it gives your gut bacteria, which lives in your large intestine, something to eat. It's basically like sending food that survives, a treacherous journey to feed your little pet gut bacteria. And bacteria, they're like little animals. And what animals do, they eat stuff and then they poop. Well, what does your gut bacteria poop? Really healthy fatty acid chains that get into your blood, and those fatty acids raise your high density lipoprotein cholesterol levels. So we're really grateful to our gut bacteria. It's one of the reasons why it's really important to keep your gut healthy. So that is, those are our big three, right? Obviously there's more conditions that we're going to talk about. Any questions on the big three so far? Any comments? I know a lot of you guys, most everybody in this call, actually, we've talked about a lot of these in our nutrition class before. But Bae, how you feeling?
I'm doing good. I have a question.
Yeah.
I do actually have a question. I've always had a low blood pressure, and I understand the normal now that I'm looking at it, but they said it's normal for me. They've always said, oh, it's normal.
So if it gets dangerous, I mean, don't be wrong, there's something wrong with low blood pressure too. Like that cannot be great. Sometimes like excessively low blood pressure can cause problems. Not in the same way that high blood pressure causes problems because basically when you have an area of high pressure, that's going to create an area of low pressure somewhere else. So then blood's not going to get delivered properly, right? So it can lead to like clotting and things like that. Low blood pressure can also be a problem, but mostly because it just means that like sometimes you don't have enough pressure to get the blood out of your legs and then it falls back down, and so low blood pressure can be problematic for other reasons. But everybody in this call, I guarantee you, has experienced a very sudden, very dramatic drop in blood pressure where you've been basically super low blood pressure. And Bae, you can tell me specifically if this happens often or not. Do you ever like jump up, like, maybe you've been sitting, maybe you're like, all right, PFT 119 day 6 is done, and you jump up and then you like go to run away, but then like all of a sudden you start to see a little stars and your vision starts to go
Yeah.
So that is a sudden very dramatic drop of blood pressure. Basically all of your blood, which was sitting in that chair a minute ago, is still trying to be in the chair, but you moved your brain very far away very quickly. So then your brain didn't get enough oxygen for like a millisecond, which made it freak out. So then your brain goes, all right, well, clearly we're having trouble flowing blood to me, and I am the most superior thing on the body. Therefore, we're having trouble getting blood to go against gravity. So you know what we should do? We should lay down. So then it makes you pass out. And that's what happens, because then, you know, blood can flow a lot easier this way than it can this way. So it's sort of a defense mechanism. Now, if you're not like fainting regularly, if you are not having like cardiovascular issues regularly, then low blood pressure is not going to be a big problem. But yeah, like my blood pressure is low as well. Like my blood pressure is like 110 over 78 or something, which is kind of funny because it's like not a direct translation there. It's like a drop of 10 in the systolic, but only a drop of 2 in the diastolic. But the last time I got my blood pressure checked, you know, you're going to see that pretty commonly. I'd be willing to bet that most of the people in this call, I mean, we're all PFT people here, not to brag, but we are all active individuals. So I wouldn't be surprised if most people in this call have low blood pressure. Did your doctor ever tell you it was something to worry about?
No, it's always been low. So I've always been active. I mean, but they see it as it's normal. You're normal. Nothing's wrong.
Yeah. So, you know, that's fine. And they're also starting to see us budge a little bit on this. They're finding that like as you become like a senior, you know, part of getting older is your blood vessels stiffen up just a little bit. So they'll see like seniors will have like a blood pressure. Maybe if they're very healthy for them might actually be closer to like 130 over 85, you know, because it's kind of expected. But you know, that's still not 140 over 90. That's where we start to see our problems. But yeah, totally normal. All right. So next thing we're going to look at, let's take a look. I actually got a discussion question here. So get those unmute buttons ready, guys. So let's talk about the idea of like, you know, let's look at our role, the role of a personal trainer in preventative care, right? So if you have a client who comes to you and they say, I've got diabetes, arthritis, and osteoporosis, right? They come to you and they tell you they got all those things, right? You got a couple options. You are going to listen to what they have to say, and you're going to think back on all the different rule changes that you've got. You're like, okay, well, osteoporosis, that means I need to take it easy on the bones. But I do need to put a priority on strengthening the bones. Arthritis, I definitely need to be careful with the joints. So we need to like work on their stability. And then what did I say, diabetes? And I got like blood sugar levels, which means I need to burn through their glycogen stores consistently. So now you're like, okay, I got to consider those things, right? And they might be taking medication for some of those diseases. And so they're under control with their doctor. So what I just did is I just took the time to consider their medical condition, and I used it for programming, right? I was like, okay, you have this, therefore I'm going to do this. You have this, therefore I'm going to do this. We call that diagnosis-oriented program design. And it's where you are basing your program design on their medical diagnosis. Now, here's the question. How could that be a bad thing? What do you think some of the drawbacks are to diagnosis-oriented program design? What do you think some of the drawbacks of only considering someone's disease are? Discuss. Come on, guys, one person. Don't leave me hanging here.
Well, I'm thinking on it.
Is it your question is what activities they would do, or
not asking what activities, but what would be wrong, what would be bad for us if we were to base our program design solely on the fact that our client told us they have a specific disease?
Maybe it's not what they wanted you to do.
Yeah, that could be part of it, right? It could hurt your relationship with the client. Maybe they don't want to work out because you're giving them maybe too gentle of a workout that's kind of boring, right? And guess what? That means that they don't work out, and not working out is super detrimental. So by doing a general gentle workout, you actually would have gotten more progress than giving them something super specific. Charlie, what do you think?
I'm just saying you're looking at all the bad things that maybe he can't or can't do, and then what about the good things he can or workouts he does feel capable of doing?
Nailed it. Oh my God. That's almost like you're about to see. That is almost word for word what is on the next slide.
Wait. What was the answer?
Yeah. So here's one of the biggest problems with diagnosis oriented. You are labeling your client as dysfunctional rather than labeling them as measurably functional. So we're saying that like, oh, you're a person with these problems. You're not taking into account all the stuff that they might be great at. So then you're making these little wimpy workouts that honestly, it's not even considered physical. Maybe it won't even be considered physical activity. Like this is why, like, I mean, like walking is generally good for you, but like, I don't consider walking an option for me when it comes to exercise. I consider walking general activity for me, but like, I'm not improving my cardiovascular system. I'm not improving it when I go for a walk. You know, it's not hard enough because we've trained beyond that. Just like 5 push-ups isn't really going to have much of an effect anymore because we've done so many more than that, right? So you are labeling your client as dysfunctional rather than considering that they are, you know, they are functional with some dysfunction, right? See the difference? Like I don't know why this is an example I thought about. Maybe because I just glanced down and I saw it. My car is a really good example of this. The thing looks dumb. It's a dumb looking car because it's got spray paint all over it because it was vandalized, right? It still drives me. It still gets me where I need to go. Like, it's not like I'm going to be like, oh, I can't drive because my car's been. No, my car is perfectly functional. It's got one specific thing wrong with it. So you know what I'm not going to do? I'm not going to go put it on the magazine of some car magazine. You know, I'm not going to go say, hey, I'm a car model, you know? But I'm going to drive somewhere. I'm going to go camping, you know? Same thing is true of your client. If your client has osteoporosis, does that mean they can't work out? No. What? It just means that they should avoid like super high impact exercise. And, you know, be cautious with things like foam rolling because maybe that'll cause like a fracture because you're putting a lot of pressure, you know, bending and pressure on a boat. But maybe foam rolling is not a great option, but tiger tailing, right, using the stick or a theracane, maybe that's a great option because then they can manage their pressure a little bit more effectively. We see the difference, guys?
Yes, sir.
Cool. I'm putting a little bit of extra emphasis on this just because this class is pretty, like I said, like a lot of the questions in this class are pretty easy, but there are a couple questions related to the differences between diagnosis-oriented problem exercise management and problem-oriented. There's a couple questions about the differences, and sometimes those trip people up because they're just worded very weirdly. So I want to spend some time on this. So here's the thing: diagnosis-oriented, not awesome. That's not what we're aiming for. First off, we don't diagnose anyways, but it's program design based solely on a client's disease or solely on their condition rather than basing it on the individual themselves, right? So there's a couple things that suck about this. One of them, it makes it really difficult to address your client if they have like multiple conditions, right? Like suddenly like the thing that works for arthritis might interfere with the things that are, you know, good for cancer patients, right? And if your client has both, suddenly you're like, right? Like I'm supposed to do high reps because of this, but I'm supposed to do low reps because of that, right? You can't really, and suddenly you're contradicting yourself, right? So it does make it difficult for that. And it makes it difficult if your client doesn't fit into one category, right? Again, if your client is like, if you're trying to determine like what phase of the OPT to put your client in, that's going to make it really difficult, right? Because you're just going to think, well, they don't really fit in any of the phases, right? Which is why we've got this class, because a lot of times these conditions don't fit with any specific phases. And your perception of your client's capabilities is going to be off, right? Like we said, like you might make the workout way too easy for your client. And then suddenly they're not doing, you know, the type of physical activity that's going to result in improvement. Remember, improvement only happens when your body is overloaded. You have to overreach. Your body has no reason to get stronger unless you give it a reason to get stronger. If your body goes, oh no, I sucked at that, right? Then your body will develop some strength. But if your body is not, if your body's like, yeah, I'm already good at 5 push-ups, I don't need to get better, right? It has no reason to get stronger. So labeling your client as nothing but dysfunctional, well, you're not going to probably push them hard enough. And like I said, and like that's what I like to, you know, you can see this here. It labels your client as dysfunctional instead of measurably functional, right? So everybody in here, you know, can go for a jog. I know some of you guys are like, nope, I hate going for runs. Right? I'm a spin bike or a Stairmaster person, right? I've never been able to just have the endurance to kind of get through a mile. You know, I've known plenty of clients who can't run like a mile, right? And you know, they're like, no, I can't run a mile. And it's like, I can't. Nope, it's impossible. Right? Like birds fly, fish swim. I can't run a mile. These are all just facts. And it's like, no. Here's the thing. You're probably trying to run your mile too fast. You're going too hard in the beginning, so your heart rate is spiking. So you need to slow down. You are measurably functional, not dysfunctional. It is not impossible for you to do that mile. You need to do it in a specific way, and then we can work from there. You got a client with arthritis, they can't maybe squat all the way down like hips below parallel, right? Fine. You know, that doesn't mean they can't do squats. They can do quarter squats or half squats, right? So that's the big difference here between that's diagnosis oriented. Don't fall into that trap as a trainer. Don't fall into the trap of like only writing workouts based on like if your client has like a problem. A disease. Instead, we want to focus on POEM or problem-oriented exercise management. So I'm also not saying go completely in the opposite direction and do not take any account into, you know, of your clients, you know, diseases or conditions they, you know, comorbidities they might be dealing with. Like don't not consider them. You know, they're definitely something to keep in your brain, but are they a problem or not? Right? That's what we need to figure out. Is it actually affecting your workouts? Right? Again, if someone has blood pressure at like 140/90, which is hypertension, right? But they don't really have any symptoms of hypertension. Like they don't, you know, they don't get the spotty vision. They don't, which happens with high or low blood pressure. They don't, you know, they don't have the labored breathing. You know, they don't have any of those problems. Well, then it's not a problem, right? Yeah, you have the condition, so let's work to reverse it. But like, I don't have to really make that many adjustments. Guess what? You're gonna get a hard workout today, you know? So that's problem oriented. Now, how do you actually do that? How do you determine, well, how do I know if it's a problem or not? That's where fitness assessments come in. So problem oriented exercise management is going to use subjective and objective assessments to determine the problems or the needs that your client has in order to create a plan, rather than just basing the plan on the disease, right? So the nice thing about this, right, is it helps you reveal any physiologic dysfunction. So if I had a client who came to me and they said, hey, I've got hypertension, I'm like, great, let's work on it, right? One of the things I would definitely do is I would test their blood pressure to ensure that like it's within normal healthy ranges. If their blood pressure is as high as like 160, you know, that day, like, which is crazy high, I'm definitely not going to start exercising with them. I'm like, you know what, today it's actually, you know, your blood pressure is a little bit too high. It could be dangerous. You could pass out in the middle of a workout. But if it's within a, you know, relatively healthy range, you know, at the start of our workout, cool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put them through a cardiovascular assessment. I'm going to make them do a Rockport walk test because that 1 mile walk is going to tell me an estimation of their VO2, and it's going to tell me what their general fitness level is, right? So put them on the treadmill. I make them walk 1 mile. I tell them, I'm like, hey, I want you to use that plus sign as often as you can without breaking into a jog. I measure what their heart rate is immediately at the end of that mile. I measure how long it took them. And I use that math to say, all right, well, in your age group, you should have been able to, walk that a minute or so faster. And you should have been able to, your heart rate shouldn't have really been much higher than like 130. But yours is all the way up in the 140s. Took you this long. That's a signal to me that we could use walking as something to really improve your fitness levels. We need to work on your cardiovascular capabilities, right? There's our priority. So there it was. It's the hypertension's not the problem here. The problem is that they don't have a very healthy cardiovascular system. So what am I going to address? I'm going to address the problems. Do you guys see the stark contrast between these two concepts?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? Like this is what, I think that's a rookie mistake that this is a mistake that I made a lot when I first got into like personal training. I was taught all these fitness assessments and I was taught this kinesiology and I understood how the body moved, right? And so I would spend all my time like doing these fitness assessments, be like, here's what's going on. You're doing this. We got to address that. I'd spend all my time like working on these corrective exercise techniques. And then my workouts just weren't really all that hard. They were all just my clients started moving better, but did they get fitter? Not as effectively as they could have. And this is where, you don't always have to do just corrective exercise, right? You can incorporate corrective exercise into a regular routine. You just need to figure out what the problems are. So it directs your exercise therapy towards problems that can be improved through physical activity, and it transforms the overwhelmingly complex nature of comorbidities, right? Like having multiple disease, it is complicated. You're like, holy crap, you get all these, it's a lot of stuff to consider, right? It transforms all that into something that's a little bit more manageable, So how do we do all this, right? This problem-oriented stuff? Well, we're going to use this concept right here. And this is a big ACSM concept, but they're going to call it evidence-based medicine. So evidence-based medicine is the practice of medicine that is guided by or based on recommendations originating in objective tests and published in scientific literature rather than anecdotal observations. So this is where we are looking at the difference. Like when we are analyzing things, when we're basing our science, right? We are basing it on like lab tested, observed, recorded, written down pieces of evidence, studies, right? And then analysis of those studies. We call that a meta-analysis. That's what we're basing all the stuff that we're going to talk about in this course on. We have seen exercise improves osteoporosis, diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia. It improves those things when you apply this amount of stress. Now, is there that person out there who's like, well, I mean, what I started doing was just drinking a glass of water every morning when I woke up. And suddenly, like just by doing that 8 ounces of water every single day, I read it in a magazine, I lost a couple pounds in the first couple weeks. Does that mean that didn't happen? Of course not. It definitely happened. Your client told you so. But does that mean since this one person had success doing that, from now on, when you're trying to put someone on a weight loss routine, you're just going to tell them to drink 8 ounces of water? No. Chances are this person, there was something specific going on in their life. They were outside of the norm. This is where, I start to kind of get a little combative about like specific types of like diets or workout routines and things like that. Is it possible that some people have dieted their entire life unsuccessfully and then all of a sudden tried keto, and keto was the amazing thing that just unlocked and fixed everything for them? Is that possible? Yeah, of course it is, right? And I have nothing against keto if it's done properly and healthily, which is properly, I guess. Right? But does that mean that like keto is superior? No, of course not, right? Just like, the bench press may have the greatest amount of EMG activation, and it might have the most activation of your pectoral muscles. Does that make it the best check session? No, it doesn't work that way, right? There's no best version of stuff. There's just whatever works for your client. And that's all going to be based on evidence, right? This is what drives me crazy. Not to harp on the news or get too real worldly about it, but I keep hearing these stories pop up on the news, and they're like, these people, they had the vaccine and then they went out and they still got COVID. Yeah, doesn't mean the vaccine doesn't work. Some people have a weak immune system and they're just more likely, and their immune system just dropped the ball. They had the blueprint. What a vaccine does is it inoculates you. It's supposed to tell your body, like, hey, if you ever see, it's a wanted poster, if you ever see this virus, attack, right? And here's the tools. This is what works to attack it. That's what the vaccine is, right? So it's a wanted poster in your immune system. But you know what? Maybe your immune system's not so good at reading, right? And so, yeah, some people have caught this thing after getting vaccinated. It's not 100%, effective. Does that mean we should just give up on it? No, God. Sorry. I live in a world with Facebook and I check it too, and it ruins my life. Sorry if I sound cranky. So, let's look at problem-oriented exercise management. Let's look at how to do this. So we got a kind of a 5-step process here. You guys know how much I love my processes. This actually is super similar to our 3-step process that I normally I like the 3-step because it's so watered down and very simple. But if you peel it apart a little bit, you can get up to 5 steps. So what we're going to do is we are going to collect our subjective information first. So that's going to involve talking to your client and saying, what are your goals? What does your lifestyle generally look like? What are your hobbies? What's your occupation? What's your favorite type of thing to do when it comes to physical activity? And what diseases do you have? Oh, and what medications are you on? Now you might think like, wait a minute. So medication, that should be very objective, right? I take 20 milligrams of this 7 days a week, right? It's like those are number things. It's very measurable, right? Absolutely. And I love that thought, but medication is not considered objective because the way it affects one person could be totally different than the way it affects someone else. Like me, cold medicine wrecks me. It makes my teeth ache. It makes me really lightheaded, nauseous. I don't do well on cold medicine. Most medications kind of kick my butt. I don't know why. I just don't respond to them very well. So that's something that kind of runs in my genes because my dad's very similar. That's why it's subjective. So you're going to collect your subjective information first. Then you're going to be like, okay, well, now I know a little bit about like your subjective stuff. Let's work in gathering some objective stuff. So now I want to get some measurable information. How much do you weigh? What's your BMI? How old are you? How tall are you? Right? How much can you bench press? Maybe, I don't know. What is the angle of your knees when you squat down to parallel, right? All of that measurable stuff. How fast can you run a mile, right? We're going to get that objective information, and we're going to compare that objective information against normal successful performers, right? It's like, well, someone your age should be able to run a mile this fast, right? Or strength standards, right? Someone you should be able to bench press 1.5 times your body, whatever. That's a lot, by the way. That's an elite athlete, but that's our objective information, right? And those are our assessments. We're going to look at like our specific, then we're going to come up with the specific assessments. We're going to kind of come up with an assessment protocol specific to our client. Now, in the past, for those of you who have been through our program design classes where we've done fitness assessments, I will often take you through basically every fitness assessment we've got. right? I'll be like, we're gonna do this one, and we kind of just go in order, and we're gonna go through the whole book. But you're not always gonna do that, you know. If I've got a 65-year-old client who is not, you know, does not care about improving their squat 1 rep max, do I need to do a 1 rep max squat assessment? Not really, right? I can totally, I'll make somebody in their 70s barbell squat. I don't care, as long as they can do it properly. That's another thing, by the way, like age is just a number. Like I don't base, you know, I don't say no, old clients can't do squats. That'd be a ridiculous thing to say. Because I've known 80-year-old clients, I'm not exaggerating. I've known 80-year-old clients who are in better shape than my 20-year-olds. I had a guy, Al, he was 84 years old when I started training him. That's like when he approached the gym, was at 84. And Al would do burpees. Like, he was tough.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was awesome. And then it turned out my dad knew him, which is crazy. He owns a series of truck stops, because Al's like a freaking multimillionaire. But yeah, I was like, oh, my dad's a truck driver. And he was like, really? And I like told my dad, and I was like, hey, do you know Al Jubitz? And he was like, Jubitz truck stop? Yeah, I know Al. That was crazy. Anyway, so yeah, he was tough, man. He was really tough. And like, I'd have him, he stopped coming to, it's so funny. This guy was like very wealthy, but he didn't really enjoy one-on-one sessions. He's a very social guy. He was just very, you know, like talking to people and stuff. So he started coming to my group exercise classes instead. And he'd be in there doing burpees and squat jumps and stuff with, like, you know, people who are just like, I don't want to do burpees. I'm like, 84, and you do your burpees. Like, oh man, I love training him. So there's your problem list, right? Burpees were not a problem for Al. So after all that, we are going to then formulate our plan. So we are going to write our plan and say, okay, well, here's a problem. Here's how I'm going to address it. There's a problem. Here's how I'm going to address it. Here's a goal, which is a problem. Here's how I'm going to address it, right? And then I'm going to start training my client. And while I'm training them, I'm going to continue documenting consistently while I'm training them, whatever improvements they've made. So I'm going to train the individual and I'm going to document it as I go. You know, hey, your weight was 170 in week 1. It's week 4 now, and your weight's down to 165, right? That's great. That's more than a pound of weight of loss per week, right? So we're clearly what we are doing is working. Hey, your bench press 1 rep max used to be 135. Now it's 145, right? I'm documenting it. So that means today we're doing, you know, 3 sets of 115 pounds instead of what we did last week, which was 3 sets of, you know, 110 pounds, right? So I'm documenting it so I can see consistent improvements. And you'll see here what we are suggesting in this course is we're using SOAP notes. So SOAP notes are just one of the ways that we document. Now, do you have to use SOAP notes? No. But SOAP notes actually make it really easy for you to write out your subjective information about your client so that you can revisit it consistently, the objective information, which assessments are important to your client, and most importantly, arguably, you are writing down the plan at the bottom. So SOAP stands for the subjective, objective, assessments, and plan for your client. Before we kind of go into it, I'll just show you an example here. Not going to be in there. Here's a SOAP note. So here's a SOAP note for a client with cardiovascular disease. This person has coronary artery disease. So our client's name, Mike, right? Their comorbidities, they are recovering from a heart attack about 6 months ago. They struggle with hypertension and peripheral arterial disease. Hobbies include playing cards, bingo, walking to lunch or getting coffee with friends. They are retired, generally sedentary. They're on a beta blocker, which is going to lower their heart rate and lower their blood pressure. And because they have that peripheral arterial disease, they suffer from pains in their leg pretty consistently. So now I've got this subjective information laid out. What's great about that, I'm not going to forget anything about my client. So for the record, I shouldn't have been anyways. You should not forget your client's information. But that's a lot of information to have to like manage. So seeing it on like written down in their file every time you're about to see them, something you can review before your session starts, very, very helpful. And the reason SOAP notes are used so often in the medical world rather than, we don't see SOAP notes as consistently in the personal training world because it's personal training. You're one-on-one. You're probably not going to forget very much information, and you don't have to share that information with anybody else because it's just the two of you, right? But let's say you work at a place where you are maybe giving your client to another trainer. Maybe you're sharing your client. Maybe you work in a physical therapy aid situation, which, by the way, you guys can do. Not always just working in gyms. Maybe you guys find yourself in a place where you're not working in a gym, you're working in a PT clinic. If that's the case, this information, having this written down means that you can pass it between trainers and everyone's going to be on the same page. Nobody's going to be, doing different things. I've used SOAP notes at the place where I trained Al, actually. We use SOAP notes consistently, not in the group exercise classes, but in the other ones. It was a great way to make sure that I would write a program and I could hand it off to my boss and my boss would go do it, So we've also got our objective information. Mike is 70 years old. His blood pressure is 140/90. His resting heart rate's pretty high. It's all the way up at 85. Body fat percentage of 25%, so pretty high there as well. And then we decided that for our objective information, the measurable stuff we wanted to improve, we wanted to do a tug test. That's the timed up and go assessment. We'll be looking at that later on down this mod. But it's basically where your client stands up out of a chair, walks around a cone, and sits back down. How long does it take? It's literally just a race of them versus the future them. When he squats, his knees turned out, and he has rounded shoulders and a forward head posture. So he's got that upper crossed syndrome. So our assessments that we found are most important are the chair sit to stand or the tug assessment. We like the push and pull assessment. And the chair sit to stand assessment is literally just how long does it take, what does it look like when you stand? We decided an overhead squat assessment is probably a little bit too intense for Mike because he's not used to squatting. So instead we had him sit into a chair. Still going to tell you the exact same things. It's still a squatting movement. And then the tug test. And then our plan. This is what our plan looks like, right? We're going to continually use the RPE method, that talk test. We're going to continually use that with our clients to make sure that, we are staying in touch with them and, figuring out how intense. We don't want it to be too intense. We don't want it to be too easy. We're always going to warm them up for about 10 minutes and we're going to cool them down for about 10 minutes. You'll notice we're easing into our workout a little bit more than we normally would. Usually warm-ups are closer to maybe 5 minutes. Cool downs are closer to 5 minutes. We're making these a little bit longer because this person has coronary artery disease. We are going to avoid isometrics because isometrics have actually been shown to increase tension. So we're doing a 4-1-1 tempo instead of a 4-2-1 tempo. Or maybe even we use a 4-0-1 tempo. Both are good options. And then we're going to we're going to do active isolated stretches instead of doing static stretches. I know static stretches are typically what we do with most of our clients who are in stabilization, but again, we don't want to do isometrics with Mike. So we're going to do 1 to 2 sets instead of 5 to 10 reps where he's only going to hold each rep for about 1 second. So that's slow rhythmic stretches. And which ones are we focusing on? His upper traps, his pecs, his lats. He's going to do a TFL and a glute stretch and a piriformis stretch. And that's going to help with the knees caving out and the shoulders rounding. For cardio, I want him walking every single day. But rather than doing, he's probably not going to have the endurance with peripheral arterial disease. Blood's going to pool in his legs. So it's going to be pretty painful. So I'm probably going to have him walking 3 times a day for just 10 minutes each, rather than going for a 30-minute session. 30 minutes might be a little bit too painful because the blood will start pooling in his legs. If we keep it to 10 minutes, that's less likely to happen. And he still burns the same amount of calories. It's still 30 minutes. It just takes place over, 12 hours instead of over, 1/2 hour. And then there's our resistance training section. So that is what SOAP notes kind of look like. So let's kind of go through that here and see if we can make that a little bit more specific. So your subjective information. Oh, and SOAP notes by definition, it's a documentation tool for writing a client's program and documenting their progress, just like, a workout journal would be. Subjective information. Like I said, this is going to be data gathered about your client that cannot be measured, right? So it's immeasurable information, right? If you told me, it's like, hey, what do you do for a living? It's like, oh, I'm an accountant. And you can't say, how much accountant are you, right? Like there's no way to measure that, right? So there's, that's very subjective information. How much a medication affects you, it's subjective, it's based on how you feel. So your occupation is going to be huge here. Your lifestyle, any past injuries or surgeries. If you tell me you got like a sprained ankle when you're in high school, maybe that affects you a lot. Maybe it affects that person very little. Everybody's different. And then are you wearing dress shoes in work? I know that sounds kind of weird, but it puts you in a heel elevation. So it might tell me that you have tight calf muscles. Do you have a lot of mental stress? That causes a lot of shoulder elevation, which now we know leads to rounding. What are your recreation? What are your hobbies? Do you not have any hobbies, right? Do you not have very much outside recreation? Well, that might explain why we don't burn very many calories. Past injuries, past surgeries, chronic conditions, and medications. Now, there is a table in your textbook that you will find in chapter 6 that has how medications will affect the body in general. I wouldn't say you need to have these necessarily memorized for this course, but they do come up sometimes in the more advanced NASM certifications. So you might not see this in the regular version, but if we look at like NASM medications, if we look at this table here, you kind of want to get familiar with what the medications are prescribed for and what their effects are. So we can see beta blockers. They are generally used as a hypertension medication, but they can also be prescribed for an arrhythmia if your client has like an irregular heart rhythm. So if they are on a beta blocker, the two things it's going to affect are your heart rate and blood pressure. It will lower your heart rate and it will lower your blood pressure. So if your client has an irregular heart rhythm like tachycardia, which is your heart beats too fast, or if they are hypertensive, maybe this is the right medication for them. So that's what their doctor put them on. So now if you're giving your client like a fitness assessment, or you're putting them on a treadmill and you're like, hey, we're supposed to be at 65% of your heart rate max. And their heart rate's just like not going up. They're over there like, but their heart rate's like depressed because of this medication. You take into account that medication, right? You don't want to push your client too hard. Diuretics don't really have much of an effect on the heart rate, but they can lower the blood pressure. Vasodilators, that's actually Viagra is actually an example of a vasodilator, but it's a blood pressure medication. That's going to elevate the heart rate, or it could have no effect on the heart rate, or it could lower the heart rate. So, keep an eye on it. And then it can basically lower blood pressure. So, and antidepressants can raise your heart rate, but lower your blood pressure, which is pretty fascinating. So we got to kind of look at these different medications and be somewhat familiar. Here's the cool thing about this, guys. You're going to notice there's a lot of like exceptions to rules in this course. And there's a lot of like tables and medications to look at. You don't have to have them memorized. I don't have them memorized, right? But whenever I have a client who tells me they are suffering from whatever disease, I do know how to look it up. I got my book, right? And I'm gonna flip to that chapter. I'm gonna open that table and be like, all right, and I'm gonna do a quick refresher, right? You don't have to have this all like up in your noggin at all times. This is referenceable material. You know, this is stuff you can look up. Now, objective information, that's the very measurable stuff, right? This is going to be things like physiologic assessments. Maybe that's your target heart rate or your blood pressure, or your heart rate, your heart rate zones, right? Like my heart rate zones are, my zone 1 is like, what is it? 145 to 158, I think. That's measurable. It's a very specific number for me if I'm trying to stay in zone 1. Another client could be a little bit higher, could be a little bit lower. Everybody's gonna be a little different. Body composition assessments, your body mass index, right? That's very measurable. It's a number like 24.9, right? Body fat percentage, 15.6, your body weight, 165 pounds, right? Those are all very measurable, objective pieces of information. We've got cardiorespiratory assessments like the YMCA step test, the Rockport walk test, the pacer. Remember everybody doing the pacer test? Beep, 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 right? Or maybe just like a 6 to 12 minute walk test. That 6 to 12 minute walk test is actually one of the easiest to do. You just do a little bit of math to know exactly how many miles per hour you are supposed to travel in order to walk let's say a 6 minute mile. By the way, if you're going to do a 6 minute mile, that's a walking at a 10. So good luck walking. But maybe you put your client at 4.0 on the treadmill, 4 miles per hour. You make them walk for 12 minutes. If you make them do that, and then at the end of that 12 minutes, boom, you test their heart rate to see what it is. If it was this number when they first started working out and now it's down here, guess what? 4 miles an hour, not hard enough anymore. Make it harder. There is static assessment. There's posture assessments, which we talked about, the overhead squat, the pushing and pulling assessment, right? And then there's performance assessments like the Davies test or the push-up test or the tug test, right? There's a lot of different, objective assessments out there, right? How much can you bench? That's an objective number. And then skill assessments, right? Hand-eye coordination and things like that. Then when it comes to your assessments, right? When you've sort of, after the information has been gathered, your subjective and your objective portions, what you're gonna do is you're gonna write down the relevant data that is related to your client and which assessments are most important to you, that relevant information. That's where we put the assessment stuff, right? So if your client weighs 150 pounds, they're well within normal healthy body weight ranges, but they are suffering from, well, not suffering. Let's say they're just going through pregnancy, right? Well, body weight is not something we are going to be looking at. That's a conversation they're going to have with their doctor, because you're not measuring your client's body weight, you're measuring their doctor's measuring it, right? So it's not really relevant to the workout plan that we are writing for our client. But what might be relevant instead is how their posture is being altered, and what their physical activity is like, or what their heart rate's doing. Their heart should be keeping up totally normally throughout a pregnancy. So if their heart rate starts getting more out of shape, that means that they're being a little overly sedentary. So that's the relevant pieces of information. And then we're going to write the plan. We're going to write up a program. We're going to whip up a program based on the information that we gathered, the assessment determinations, and that's going to give us a plan of action. So when we are developing an exercise prescription, without doing a specific exercise test. So let's say you have a client who you are just trying to improve their general physical activity. They didn't necessarily do the objective assessments. They didn't exactly do like specific assessments with you. One of the things that you can use is just what your client's general heart rate is during the workout. And we're back to that classic RPE method, that rating of perceived exertion. So here's the thing. If I do a step test with you or a Rockport walk test, I know exactly what your heart rate should be during your workout. like, let's see here. Let's say I got a client who's 40 years old. God dang it, I clicked the wrong one. And their resting heart rate is 70 beats per minute. I hit calculate here. And I want my client between 70 and 80% of their heart rate. That's 147 to 158. Cool. I know exactly what those numbers were. Now, if I didn't do that assessment, which, that can happen, instead, I'm going to use the rating of perceived exertion, right? I'm going to say, okay, we're going to break this down into a couple different zones here. I either want you, if I'm trying to get you to burn some fat, well, then I want you to be between like 60 and 70%. That's like a 13, maybe a 14 on the RPE scale. If I'm trying to improve your aerobic fitness, I want you between like 70 and 80%, right? That's where, that's going to be like a 14 to 15 or 16 on the RPE scale. If I'm trying to improve your maximum performance, and really like get your heart rate to like drop faster, get back to normal quicker, then, I want you to be between like a 16 to, maybe 17 or maybe even an 18 on that RPE scale. And then maximum intensity, I want that between like an 18 or a 19. We don't really go up to 20. I mean, you can go up to 20. 20 is maximum, but that's where your client like throws up on your shoes. Right. So we can use that RPE scale here, right? So we call that the Borg scale, right? The rating of perceived exertion. So there are heart rate zones and there's the Borg scale. Both are very effective. Heart rate zones is like, John, I want you between 120 and 130. That's giving them a number with a heart rate monitor, right? Or, measuring their heart rate. But not everybody has a heart rate monitor. Not everybody finds them easy to use. Not everybody knows how to measure properly. So instead we say, hey, on a scale from 6 to 20, I want you between like a 12 and a 13, right? Or 12 and a 14. Or I want you between like a 15 or 14 and 16, or I want you between 16 and 18. I want to put them somewhere in between there. Now, I realize the Borg scale 6 to 20 is sometimes hard to quantify. It's like a very odd scale. So that's where we have the modified Borg scale over here. Basically, exercise starts around like a 2 or like a 3 out of 10, 4 to 5 out of 10, but 6 to 7 out of 10, 8 to 9. We really don't want our client to be at a 10 out of 10. It's just that's asking for trouble. So that's how we're going to measure our intensity and manage our intensity with our clients. Now, obviously, like I said, medications can have a drastic effect, right? Beta blockers can reduce your exercise capacity because it reduces your heart rate and blood pressure. But if your client has like heart failure, guess what? Now it has the total opposite effect. This is why subjective medication is considered subjective. It will affect everybody a little bit differently. A normal person who takes a beta blocker, it will reduce their efficiency. A person with congestive heart failure, it will improve it because guess what? It's a medicine, right? So we'll see, we call those paradoxical effects where basically a medication can have the effect it's supposed to have, and sometimes it can have exactly the opposite effect. Certain steroids can reduce muscle wasting, but certain steroids can actually, increase it as well because it boosts your metabolism so much. So this is that general list. Like I said, here's what these medications are generally used for. You can see antidepressants are used for psychiatric and emotional treatments. Bronchodilators are used for asthma. Nitrates are prescribed for congestive heart failure and hypertension. Calcium channel blockers are used for hypertension and chest pain. And then here's what their effects are, right? Nitrates increase your heart rate, or maybe they don't affect your heart rate, or maybe they don't affect your blood pressure, or maybe they lower your blood pressure. We don't know what it's going to do to our client, right? They will often have paradoxical effects, but you should be aware of what they can do so you can keep an eye out for it. If I know that my client's on a beta blocker, I'm going to watch to see if their heart rate drops dramatically all of a sudden. I'm going to keep an eye to see if like all of a sudden, I'm going to ask them continually, hey, how's your blood pressure? You getting spotty vision at all? When we move, I'm probably not going to do burpees, but if they're doing something like burpees, they shouldn't be, by the way. I'm going to see like, hey, are you having trouble? Like, are you getting the spotty vision, right? So we know exercise has really positive effects, guys. It's been associated with improved mental health, improved physical health, and it should be the first thing considered when we are treating pretty much any condition out there. It's going to have general improvements in physical fitness, which are going to have general improvements in overall health. Any questions today, guys? Are you guys stoked for being out of kinesiology?
Yeah.
A little bit less technical. I'm excited. This class is kind of fun. I really like building. We're going to build different soap notes in class every time, which will be really, really fun. So we're going to make like that sheet mic that was made up. So we'll actually kind of build that in class, which will be, you'll kind of see that happen in real time. And it's a very different approach to writing workouts than just being very much on the OPT, this is sort of like learning how to write action plans more so than just how to write like workouts. This is the comprehensive stuff. You can address diet stuff in a soap note. You can say like, hey, I want you to try to improve your fruits and vegetables intake,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm stoked. All right, guys. Any other questions?
All good, Brad, on my side.
Cool. Bay, I saw you.
Yeah, thank you. You have a great
Okay.
weekend.
All righty. Guys, you're on to the weekend. Enjoy it. If you haven't done your final exam, please get that in by Monday, okay?
Sure.
All right. I'll see you guys tomorrow.
All right,
No, you
take care,
won't.
Brad. See ya.
See you
See you
Monday.
Monday.